Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, February 20th, 2006, and let me just say to you, listeners, if you heard a few episodes ago, I bemoaned the fact that we had once again missed the date on which Vice President Dick Cheney shot a business associate in the face while hunting, and we said, God, we got to find a way to do that story, we got to find a way, and we did not wait a whole year to do it. We just had to wait 9 days because we are now doing it. February 20th, 2006, 9 days after that hunting accident. The story is bursting out into the open all over the political press, the Sunday shows, eventually a news conference in which the man who was shot in the face apologized to the man who shot him in the face, who happened to be the Vice President of the United States. So here we are, and I will just say that if there's anything we do on this day in esoteric political history, it is we keep our promises. And we promised that we wanted to do this episode. We're all thrilled to do this episode, and we have a hook. In part because, it took a while for this story to trickle out, which is where we will start as soon as I introduce our usual guests, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello.
Hey there.
So it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. I'd say in this case, it's both. The crime is pretty amazing, but the cover-up is interesting, and maybe we'll do a little bit on that because we are sort of marking this window. The news of this didn't come out right away, and that became as much of a story as anything. I mean, sure, you're on a ranch. It's not like you're in the public eye, but you want to walk us through why it did take a little bit for the nation and then the press to realize that this had gone down, and then we'll circle back to what happened on that day itself.
I just want to say it's still not clear what day this man was shot in the face. That's kind of the occluding work that was going on around this. So we'll cover the shooting in just a second, but it wasn't until February 12th that the woman who owned the ranch on which all of this happened, with the blessing of Dick Cheney, the Vice President of the United States, called up the Corpus Christi Color-Times, obviously the biggest newspaper in America, and said that this shooting incident had happened on her property, and that it had involved the Vice President of the United States. And that's how this information gets out, is through this conversation with the media. And then the rest of the journalists in the United States are like, hey, what happened here with the Vice President shooting a man in the face?
Yeah, the cover-up starts almost immediately. I'm sure. I mean, there's ways in which you can say it, and I think Cheney does say, like, sort of like, I just wanted to make sure he was okay before we, released anything, and wanted to make sure he was on the road to recovery. But this is a big deal, and the fact that it took so long, I think it only makes it look more suspicious as to why they waited to take this information public.
Yeah.
And you have that conversation with the Corpus Christi Color-Times. And then it's not until the 15th that Cheney speaks publicly, and he chooses to have that conversation on Fox News. Then a report is finally released on the 16th. Witness statements aren't released until the 22nd. So there is this kind of long trickle, which actually helps us because it allows us to do this episode a week or so after the event. But there is this sense that, like, it's a little challenging to get information about what exactly happened on this quail hunt in Texas.
Which also means it stays in the media even longer.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Great strategy.
24-hour news cycle. This is a story you want in and out. You know what I mean?
Right.
And instead, this is the story that played out really over weeks and became not just like, a media frenzy, but like the butt of jokes on late night TV. Like everyone is trying to, figure out, like, is Cheney really a heartless person? It's all of these different things. It does not look good for him.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the jokes were going to fly regardless. And we're sitting here actually taping in a moment where, like, Jon Stewart's back on the Daily Show. No surprise, Jon Stewart had a lot of fun with this on the Daily Show. But, you know, the jokes were going to fly regardless. But yeah, Kellie, to your point, like, if the first time the nation had heard about this was like on the next day in a press conference from Cheney, where he offers a beat by beat account of what went down and how sorry he is, and says this friend of mine is in the hospital, and, you know, just sort of sets that tone, then maybe the jokes happen for a day and, you know, people move on. And instead, yes, it just simmers and simmers, and there's, you know, the vacuum of information. We should talk about the day itself. One little tidbit, and, you know, we don't have to go down this too much, but there's some great interviews with the reporter at the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, little local newspaper, the reporter who, like, fielded the phone call and first got the kind of debrief of, oh, this stuff went down on this ranch. And I think that was, like, young cub reporter just making their way, and then it's like a great kind of first entry into the world of journalism, and, you know, also an argument for, like, local journalism and all that stuff that has disappeared in many ways. But back to what we think is either February 10th or 11th, maybe even February 12th. The consensus is kind of February 11th around 6 p.m. is the day that this incident happens. We should say the person's name. The person who was shot is Harry Whittington, a 78-year-old, at that point, 78-year-old Texas attorney. He gets shot in the face and chest with a 28-gauge Perazzi shotgun fired by the Vice President Dick Cheney. They are quail hunting. There were reports that, like, these two were, like, close friends or whatever. I think they're associates, right? This was one of those, like, classic, you know, Texas power, powerful folks, friend of a friend, let's get together.
Money and power hanging out.
Money and power, the kind of thing that, you know, Harlan Crow and likes to put together for Supreme Court justices. But one of those kinds of trips. So, yes, they're not best friends, but they are acquaintances. They know each other from the sort of Texas scene, obviously, which is where Cheney and Bush get their start. So let's do as much as we know about that day. They're out there, they're quail hunting. What goes down?
So from what we understand, somebody had, like, scared out a covey of quails, and they're out there quail hunting, so they shoot. And Harry Whittington goes out to go find whether they hit the quail and to retrieve it. And while he's out there, this is what they say, they scared up another covey, and Cheney, who should have, not shot at all, not knowing where everyone was, but also should have aimed up at the sky, which is the proper safety protocol for quail hunting, shoots low at this second covey of quails, and he doesn't hit any quails, but he does manage to hit Harry Whittington. It sprays tons of buckshot, and he's hit with like 200 pieces, 200 pellets or something like that. So he gets a good face and chest full. And then, you know, there's always an ambulance that travels around with the vice president. And so it's that team, the Secret Service team, who go and they get Whittington, realize he needs some pretty immediate medical care. And he's taken by ambulance to the tiny hospital there in town and then flown to a larger hospital a few hours away.
Yeah. And the injuries are pretty steep. I mean, like, you mentioned him having like over 200 sort of pieces of buckshot in him, but also one piece gets lodged right near his heart, and it causes him to have a mild heart attack. I mean, this actually could have killed him. One of his lungs collapsed. I mean, he had another piece that just missed his carotid artery. He almost bled out. I mean, this was not sort of a mild accident.
Hosted by Lindsey Graham, Wondery's podcast American History Tellers takes you to the events, times, and people that shaped America and Americans. In the latest series, American History Tellers explores the Underground Railroad, a covert network of secret routes and safe houses operated by men and women committed to helping enslaved people escape bondage in the South. Follow American History Tellers on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. I mean, so many of the jokes, well, on the one hand, when you say the phrase shot in the face, like, that's serious. But
sounds gruesome.
So many of the jokes also just kind of like, they were jokes and they sort of glossed, and I think it lost the fact that there was like a real perilous injury and sort of like tragic side of this. That said, to circle back a little bit to Cheney in this moment, it is instructive that, look, I've been hunting a couple times. I'm not a good hunter. I could have, potentially made a mistake. I mean, maybe I wouldn't. But I think part of the thing that we know coming out of this story for sure is that Cheney's not a very good hunter and that he was being cavalier out there. Yeah. And it just, for what it's worth, plays into, I think, a Bush era kind of thing of all these folks cosplaying as authentic Texas folks. George Bush did not know how to be a ranch hand, and Dick Cheney does not know good hunting protocol.
He also doesn't have his quail hunting stamp. There's a lot that is not great about this. They actually have a really good spoof of this on Parks and Rec.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ron gets shot in the back of the head by an unlicensed hunter. But yes, this does become a joke, but these are serious injuries. And Cheney, after he's collected himself and had a few cocktails and a few days to sleep on it, on the 13th, then goes and visits Whittington to check in on him and see how he's doing. So he eventually gets himself over to the hospital, and Whittington, after the heart attack and some recovery, is able to ultimately leave in time to make his apology to the vice president.
Right, so let's do that. Let's talk about that press conference now. But yes, Cheney visits Whittington in the hospital, and then the next day, or a couple days later, accepts full responsibility, but really after the story is just out there, and he has to play catch-up a little bit. He says he didn't speak because he wanted to wait to make sure that Whittington was okay before he kind of made his public statement. So that's the rationale there. But yeah, Whittington's press conference, very interesting. Let's go to that moment, and then we'll also talk about Bush's statements in reaction to this. But what do we make of that?
Whittington's better than me because I'm going to read what he says at the press conference. He says, "My family and I are deeply sorry for everything Vice President Cheney and his family had to deal with. We hope he will continue to come to Texas and seek the relaxation that he deserves." And I was like, wow. Wow. Everything Cheney went through, dude, you almost died. You bled out. You had a heart attack. Maybe I'm missing what Cheney went through in terms of public humiliation. That to me does not compare at all to almost losing your life for something
that's how power works.
It is how power works.
Yeah. Wow. I'm very sorry to have gotten in the way.
Trickle down responsibility. Yes, and this is happening. This press conference is happening the day that Whittington is released from the hospital. So 3 days after his heart attack, as he is on the road to recovery. And I think that this continues the story, too, because also remember that in this period, Cheney was, his popular image was as the kind of puppet master behind the president. That George W. Bush wasn't that smart, and Dick Cheney was actually the person running things and had kind of unlimited power. And this is one of those moments where, the guy who Cheney shot is apologizing to him, and it just reinforces, even though it's played for jokes, it reinforces that idea that Cheney is untouchable. He can shoot a man in the face, maybe not on Fifth Avenue, but he can walk away from it, not only without charges, but without, with the person apologizing to him.
Bush's statement is worth highlighting as well because it is in that same spirit. And so Bush is asked about this, and he says to the press, "People are making the wrong conclusion about a tragic accident. The vice president was involved in a terrible accident, and it profoundly affected him. When he was here in the Oval Office, I saw the deep concern he had about the person who he wounded." And he says, "I know Harry Whittington from when I was in Texas. He's a fine man." And he says, "I think the vice president," but just that initial framing of this is something that happened to Cheney. Bush sort of picks that mantle up as well. One little note on that Bush statement. I think you both know, I think I've talked about on the show, how I have a real soft spot and a kind of running collection of when a president has to issue a statement about something embarrassing or awkward or sort of scandalous, and they do it while they're having a sit down with a other world leader. And I just love that. And it happened all the time with Trump, where I just loved looking at the president of Belize who was sitting next to Trump as he was railing about this random thing. I'm like, this guy. And so shout out to Colombian President Alvaro Uribe, who thought he was just going to have a regular sit down with Bush in 2006 on February 17th, and instead had to sit there wide-eyed as Bush talked about how his vice president had shot someone in the face. I just love that running list of caught in the headlight other world leaders.
That's incredible.
But, all right, so let's go back to some of the jokes, because some of the jokes were pretty good, including Texas Monthly, adds a little hardware to their mantle, because they end up winning, I think it's the Best Cover Line of the Year award from the Magazine Publishers of America, because they put on the January 2007 cover caption of Texas Monthly, we'll tweet out this picture, but it says, "If you don't buy this magazine, Dick Cheney will shoot you in the face." And it's a Photoshop of Dick Cheney holding a smoking shotgun. So, the jokes are pretty solid.
The picture's hilarious. It's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, we should go on to say that, Whittington does go on to live a long life. I mean, he's 95 when he dies last year, and he does go back to quail hunting and all of that. But, that's just, it's hard not to laugh. I mean, I know it's bad to laugh, but there were ways in which people were sort of poking fun that just, it was hard to resist the humor in it.
It's so interesting, too, because it does become a punchline, and I think we mostly remember it through the jokes. I wonder how much the comedy around it sort of papered over or was a replacement for any actual real investigation into, why didn't we get clear information about this? Why wasn't there some kind of transparency? So instead of it turning into a scandal, it turns into a punchline, and that actually ends up being very effective for the Bush administration.
And moreover, what is this circle of power that Cheney is navigating in and quail hunting with, which we have come to learn. I mean, it's always been the case, so we've certainly come to learn as we've seen the stuff about Clarence Thomas. That's where a lot of real power happens, and I think there was a chance there to investigate on that front. I did email, but it wasn't until last night. I haven't gotten back. But a friend of the show, Adam McKay, who, of course, directed the movie Vice and depicted this scene in there. And to his credit, and to that, I think that movie's credit, made it a sort of, funny and sort of compelling moment, but did not play it up as complete slapstick in that movie, because I think that movie recognized, the swirl of power and rot around Dick Cheney. And this was sort of as emblematic of that as anything.
Did he do a deep dive into Cheney's trauma from the incident?
He does not. Vice does not do that, but it does.
But I want him crying or anything.
Yeah, I want to get his thoughts about. I wish I'd had thought of emailing him earlier. I would love his thoughts on maybe we'll put in the newsletter, but his thoughts on kind of how he approached this and to treat it as a slapstick moment versus a sort of interesting, revealing moment about Cheney and his world. But we will leave it there. Bucket list item checked off the list, because this was obviously right in our wheelhouse, and I'm glad we got to it. But we are on February 20th. Let's do our usual also on this day, some other things that happened on this day throughout history. So let's go all the way back to 1792. February 20th is when George Washington signs an act creating the United States Post Office Department.
And this is sad. In 1862, William Wallace Lincoln, the 11-year-old son of President Abraham Lincoln and First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln, died at the White House, apparently of typhoid fever.
There's so many tragedies in that family and in those stories. And to imagine, in the middle of your presidency and in the middle of the war, that you go through a loss like this it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It was also on this date in 1905 that the U.S. Supreme Court in Jacobson v. Massachusetts upheld a 7-2 vote compulsory vaccination laws intended to protect the public health. I don't know that it would be a 7-2 ruling today. We shouldn't think about that.
And 1933, February 20th, Congress proposes the 21st Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to repeal prohibition. It had been a long few years of dry and not so dry parts of the country.
Did they toast to celebrate?
I'm sure they toast to celebrate. And moreover, I think I've mentioned this on the show, but it also means that in every city in the country, there's at least one bar called the 21st Amendment. Which
sure
is a good name
is.
for a bar. So there you go.
It's a great name.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
My family and I are deeply sorry for all that Vice President Cheney and his family have had to go through this past week. We send our love and respect to them as they deal with situations that are much more serious than what we've had this week.
Radiotopia.